Kings of the Universe is a fantasy anthology podcast, and therefore may contain material not suitable for all audiences, so listener discretion is advised. The Battle Club would not find out your name. It would just find your flesh. Night had fallen in the wooded lands of Meron. A heavy stillness coated Feralans' camp like a shroud. His men had called the day early at his instruction, just after meeting with the Orc war chief. Now the men moved quickly and quietly in the darkness, careful to break camp without making too much noise. Feralan himself helped his men as best he could, loading what they would allow him to onto a cart and passing out weapons. These acolytes of Zulma will face the full might of my army and the might of Kelmira, he thought to himself as he watched the bronze spears shimmer in the torchlight. His scouts had arrived at camp just as the sun had started to move below the horizon. As they made their report, Feralan stood amazed. As it turns out, the orcs had a city. Not nearly as marvelous as their cities back home. No stone walls or mud brick buildings that were pleasing to the eye. They had fortifications, to be sure, but their walls were made out of tall tree trunks with sharpened points. Their homes were much the same, their roofs lined with animal skins and more logs acting as the foundation. Feralan listened silently, nodding as they spoke. It appears we have but one option, he said at last, his mind racing with plans and stratagems. No doubt they have sentries placed on their wall. We will have our best archers take them out and set their walls ablaze with fire. Force them out of the safety of their homes and funnel them through the gates where our spearmen will be waiting. His generals exchanged worried glances before Thurum spoke. Are you certain about this, your highness? There's no honor in throwing the orcs into an ambush like that. Feralan stared in the incandescent glow of the torches, the world around him growing mute and darker. He had heard Thurum's words, but his thoughts returned to the day in his chambers all those years ago, the horrid laughter of Zulma still echoing in his mind. We do not have the luxury of honor. Not here. Not in this battle. The thing that they worship is a threat to all things living. Any transgressions we do here, we will atone for when we return home. I want 3,000 men with me on the march. The others will stay here and guard camp. His generals exchanged worried glances, but nodded all the same. Thurum stood silently, creasing his beard, the worry plain on his face. Are you sure this is the right decision? He finally said softly. I am. I understand your hesitation, but you don't know the things I've seen in my visions. Kelmira has warned me about this threat, and Samanthian told me that his Dark Master would turn my country and people to dust. I know this is harsh, but I cannot, I will not let followers of something so dangerous survive. For the well-being of our families, citizens, and way of life, they will be brought low. 3,000 men moved as quietly as they could in the forest. One scout in the pale moonlight guiding their path. The orcish city loomed on the horizon, wooden spikes out of the walls. They were clearly ready for an attack from their chariots, seemingly unprepared for troops attacking by foot. The city was still, the occupants likely sleeping in preparation for the battle in the morning. Feralan nodded to a waiting archer. In one fluid motion, the archer took an arrow from his quiver, knocked it back, and drew. The man took a steadying breath, closing an eye to focus on his target. The night watchman came walking along the ramparts, torch in hand. He peered into the stillness of the night, smirking to himself when he saw nothing in the distance. I knew those elves would be too afraid to try anything. I bet they went back to... The archer released his arrow, the projectile silently gliding across the air before finding its mark. The watchman jolted forward, raising a shaky hand to his throat. He tried to scream, to raise the alarm, to even move. He staggered forward, clutching at the air, before the platform rushed to meet him. The second watchman turned the corner, darted to the body of the first, and tried to raise his voice to cry out, when a second arrow met its mark. The bronze arrowhead piercing out of the roof of his mouth. Shattered teeth and blood painted the inner of the wall as the body collapsed to the ground, and blood pooled around his head. That was 2 centuries gone, their shade set to whatever desolate plains of Kur, assuming their dark god allowed them that rest. Feralan nodded to a group of his spearmen, each holding a torch in their opposite hand. They broke out of formation, setting the walls alight with hungering flame, their spears ready for those that would try to escape. Inside the camp, the scene played out very differently. The stillness of the night had brought a sort of calm throughout the camp. Soft snores drifted lazily through the wooden homes, warriors resting comfortably in preparation for the next day's assault. Marrath Battlemaw lay on his back, his massive chest rising and falling slowly as he embraced his rest. A small thump filled his ears, but he waved the sound away. More than likely it was Omen, his wolf mount, sneaking into his hut to leave him a surprise for the morning. Owen had a habit of leaving such things whenever he did not get a captive as a meal or a snack. The sound of howling and whimpers jolted Marrath out of his slumber. Sleep still clung to his eyes as he fumbled for his double-headed battle-axe. The smell of fear, blood, and burnt wood assaulted his nose. He growled as he moved towards the door, pressing an ear against the relatively cool surface. From the other side, he heard them. He heard them all, screaming, howling in pain, and crying. He pushed the door open. And once out of the doorframe let out a battle cry to hopefully rally his men-at-arms. But when he looked, really looked, he stared at the terror in front of him, and he froze. I'd like to take a moment to remind all of those listening about the disclaimer at the top of the episode. This next section is going to be a lot darker than what I've done previously, so please be aware that things will take a turn. Marrath stood, frozen in fear as his people burned around him. The wooden walls, smothered with hungry flames, made their way through the small cracks between the logs. The kennel sat engulfed by flames. Panicked yipping and howls filled the confines of his city, only to be drowned out by the pleas of his people. A very few of the wolves tried to make an escape, until the wood of the kennel cracked. The stench of burning flesh and fur nearly turned his stomach. The pained cries and eventual silence tore at his heart. He snapped back to reality when he heard someone giving orders about opening the gate for freedom. Yes, he thought, watching the gate slowly open. Open the gate. We can still save some of them. He rushed to the gate, hopeful that he could gather whoever was left and find some refuge. That hope was dashed when the gate opened and a volley of arrows rained down on those in front. Men, women, and children fell to the ground, arrows pinning them in place like a rabbit on a spit. Another volley followed soon after the first, taking more lives. The family members of those who were lost were inconsolable. Mothers wailed openly as they tried to tear their eyes out. Fathers howled in a pain that one who has truly lost everything can know, only to have that pain replaced with searing anger that demands retribution. A small group of parents grabbed what they could to mount some kind of offensive. Some grabbed still burning stakes, others chose their bare fists, and still others ripped their tusks out of their mouths to use as makeshift clubs and daggers. The counterattack was over before it started. A third volley of arrows made quick work of those who tried to break free. The attack was indiscriminate. Several arrows found their homes in the skulls of his people, who fell in heaps onto the ground. The horrid display took hold of him. Through teary eyes, he watched as several children tried to wake their parents, brothers, and sisters, only to have their pleas cut off with another twang of a bowstring. He gripped his battle-axe tightly, his vision filled with white-hot fury. He let loose a battle cry as he rushed headlong into another volley. The arrows bit into his skin and muscle, but still he moved closer, his axe swinging wildly until he felt it connect with flesh. Warm blood splashed his face. A pained yell escaped from his victim, only for the scream to be cut off and quickly replaced with a pained gurgle. Marath ripped his head back. Flesh and sinew and bone snapped, tore, and split onto the ground. He spat the fleshy chunk to the dirt as the unfortunate archer clutched at his throat, desperately trying to staunch the crimson torrent, only to gurgle and collapse to the ground. Morath roared before taking another arrow, this time to the shoulder. Pain seared through his shoulder, but he brought his axe down again, cutting an elf from shoulder to his waist. He howled again, swinging wildly as more arrows flew past him and copper spearheads sliced his legs and forearms. He felt none of it, though. The sensation of pain faded to a distant memory. He could feel his movements slowing from the exertion and rampant blood loss. His green forearms now flowed crimson. Chest heaving, he made to let out another battle cry, but his voice was raw and hoarse. It was only then that he realized that he was kneeling, his arms laying slack at his side. He felt the burning of all of his wounds now, like 1,000 scorpions stinging at once. Zulma would deliver him from this. He had done it before. He always saved those that were loyal to him. His heart dropped when he saw a Feralan approach. There was no enjoyment in his eyes, no hint of that civility he spoke of. Just pure and simple nothingness. Feralan drew a dagger off of his belt, the copper shining brightly as he moved closer. Feralan looked down at the war chief, his eyes betraying nothing. There was no reason to have any kind of emotion against this orc. He was a follower of a dark god that would happily end all life if it could. Any and all practitioners would be snuffed out. Marath finally managed something. A low and mirthless laugh. You think destroying my tribe would keep you safe? He shook his head ruefully. His followers are everywhere. We are as numerous as the sand. You cannot stop us all, even those in your own kingdom. A flash of anger became visible on Feralan's face, but it was extinguished in an instant. The dagger pierced the orc's throat, cutting off any other lies that the orc would try to tell him. Feralan knelt down to face the orc, watching the blood flow from his throat and mouth. He took hold of his head and looked into his eyes. Look at your city. This is what happens to those who support that demon. When you see your master, tell him this. Your city is just the beginning. I am the ember that will burn him down. My armies are the pitch, and my leadership will stoke the flames of his defeat. With a fluid motion, he pried the dagger from his throat and left Marath to drown in his own blood. Gather the survivors. Bring them to me and they will face judgment. His men fanned out, bringing who they could find and laying them at his feet. So you were the fortunate ones. Those who were given mercy by my goddess Kalmira. He stood passively in front of them, scanning the group for any signs of resistance. Swear loyalty to me, and your life will be spared. Refuse, and you will join the rest of your brethren. The survivors, totaling some 20, a mix of men, women, and children, looked up at the king, this conquering warrior, and brought their heads to the earth below. See to it that they are fed, clothed, and wounds treated. We have no more need for bloodshed tonight. I will appoint a governor of the province when I return home. Beneath the surface of the world, Zulma watched as fresh blood saturated the walls of his holy prison. He extended what looked like a hand against a wall of radiant energy. A singular strand twisted and spasmed before taking the shape of an orc. Malrath solidified and fell to his knees with a squelch. Zulma, my lord. The homunculus that used to be Malrath gurgled, strands of blood dribbling down his chin, only to be reabsorbed in the construct that was now his frame. I have done all that you have asked of me. Why did you not save me? Why let that elf take my land? The wolf head of the amalgamation that made up Zulma only smiled.
You have done all that was required. You are a loyal servant until the end, just as you said you would be.
My lord, it isn't over. This elf, this Feralan, he says that he will be the ember that will burn you down. Please, let me be of service to you again. Let me be your champion, and let me claim the revenge that I am owed. The wolf tilted its head curiously.
What do you propose, Morath?
Great lord, give me a new form to serve you with. I would happily tear his throat out and lay his heart at your feet.
But you always were a fierce one, weren't you?
Zulma laughed as a force unseen pulled Malrath closer to his prison.
Very well. You shall have your new form. Let us see what you can do with it.
The wolf had pounced, biding its time until there was a small gap in the radiant cell. Malrath had no time to scream before the jaws enveloped him.
This change will take some time, my loyal acolyte. Be patient, and you will be rewarded.
Back in the city of Colveria, Feralan walked through one of his many gardens. He watched the date palm branches sway gently in the breeze, the shade of the palm branches providing cover for pomegranate trees. He watched his sons spar against each other. Both wore lion-skinned skirts and were equipped with blunted wooden spears and small wicker shields. They traded blows with each other under the watchful eye of Thurum. His friend proved to be a great ally and supporter of his children. Perhaps he would be the best person to govern Meron, and he could teach one of the boys how to rule. Galen would be the natural choice. He was the firstborn and held the most experience by a few years over his brother. He moved to make the offer to Thurum and Galen when a vision came to him. Calmira appeared before him, her visage now a common but comforting sight. Silently, she took his hand, and with a single step they arrived in the city of Aeoland. Calmira motioned to the lower portion of the ziggurat and bid him to follow. As they descended to the foundation of the temple, rows of various glass jars, each holding a green ooze, a sizzling sound emitting from each jar. What are these? Feralan asked, careful not to touch the jars as he peered into one of the larger ones. A large tongue swirled around the glass as it tried to reach through. Feralan jumped back, his heart pounding in his chest. I do not know what they are called, Calmira said finally, her voice calming his frayed nerves. The other gods have told me that the followers of Zulma are making these things with blood magic. All of the travelers and merchants that have passed through this city have disappeared, and this is where they have ended up. She reached out to one of the jars, and the creature placed a clawed hand on the other side. They need to be exterminated. These things, this city, everything. Calmira started to radiate her divine light, and the clawed hand started to contort, flesh charring and twisting as the ooze started to simmer and boil. These abominations must be gotten rid of. March your armies to Aeland and decimate the city. Feralans snapped back to his courtyard in an instant. Nothing seemed to have stopped. He shook his head as he tried to get the image of those things out of his mind. It appears that Calmira has one more task for me. Very well. He looked up to the heavens, watching a cloud lazily roll across the otherwise clear sky. I will do this for you, my goddess. Thurum, assemble the troops. We have one more city to conquer. Kings of the Universe was written, performed, and edited by me, Matthew Jordan. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to email the show at kingsoftheuniversepod@gmail.com. And I'll see you next time.